Hello, everyone. My name is always Asmal. Welcome to another episode of Tooways to Skin a Cat, powered by Bulldozer, a show where we talk career experiences, entrepreneurship, and investments. The main aim is to show that there's more than one way to be successful other than just climbing the corporate ladder. We are live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and the show will be on podcast by tomorrow morning. If you're joining us live, please drop a one in the comments so that we know we're not talking to ourselves, and drop a two in the comments if you're watching the recording. My guest for this week is Ashraf Garda, a radio and TV presenter, speaker, talk show host, and most importantly, founder of Champion South Africa. Ashraf, thanks so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. And it's very clear there are more than one way to skin a cat. Now I know that, right?
Definitely. And if you don't know Ashraf, then clearly you haven't been stuck on the in one somewhere in the middle of the Karoo before smartphones, where the only thing you had access to was SAFM to listen to. then you definitely know Ashraf. But to jump straight into questions, Ashraf, tell us your story. Where do you come from? And maybe outside of work, who is Ashraf Garda? Give us that backstory.
All right. So let's do it quickly. I mean, I come from a community called historically called Fitas in Johannesburg, and people in Cape Town will know that's District 6, honestly speaking, right? So Fitas, part of Joburg, same story, District 6, Fitas, Sapphire Town. That's where I come from. My surname is Garda. It's a family synonymous with business in the Fitas, Fordsburg, Oriental Plaza community, and they're synonymous with cricket playing, cricket administration in the Sackbock era. So yes, if I meet many people and they know my surname is Garda, there's a very good chance they will talk about an uncle of mine or a cousin, mainly uncles, in fact, who played in the period pre-democracy in the Sackbock era. So yeah, we're a cricket family. I'm a lousy cricketer. I'm a far better talker, and that's what I'm doing now.
That's a very, very short summary, but I like it. So, I mean, you've had many different roles for many different organizations. SAFM, SABC, I saw CNN, Al Jazeera, Supersport, 5FM, and many more. How do you manage to switch so often and still always be delivering a fully professional service? Because normally, for most of us, it takes time to settle in.
Yeah, well, I mean, some of the things, I mean, historically, with most people, they would possibly do something on radio and TV concurrently in the same day, in the same week. So that's the switch. But it's not like you would do five things in the same day or in the same week, and they're very, very different. But the reality is, I don't know. Are you able to switch? Since I brought up cricket, and that's not the plan because I'm not a cricketer. Once you've learned how to play cricket, can you play Test cricket? Can you play one-day cricket? Can you play T20 cricket? If you're able to do that, that's the different formats. The same principle applies to being a presenter on different formats, whether you're radio, TV, and whether you're moderating. The principles, I mean, at its essence, if a rugby player at its essence throws the ball, or a swimmer, because he's very topical with the Olympic Games, is able to be able to guide through it at pace in the water, then my role as a presenter is, can I ask questions? Can I engage with people? Can I get people to think on the basis of my engagement with the guest? And if you do that, you can apply that principle. It's almost like me kicking a ball now, because that's what I do. That principle in different formats, wherever they get thrown up.
Okay. So, I mean, coming from a corporate background, a lot of especially young professionals, they prefer to play it safe. They'd rather maybe stay in their current role. Well, you're not afraid to branch out and try different things. Why do you think that is? What makes you different, or what is it that you've worked on to make you that way?
Well, I don't know if I'm not afraid of branching. I think sometimes it gets thrust upon you and it just lands on your table and then you just take it, or what, right? So no, I mean, I think if we all have if plans were different, I probably would do five other things. I don't know, right? So no, I think that there's an element of risk, and there's an element of wanting to serve your purpose and making that happen. But there's also the element of what's it, the stars being aligned, a whole series of different things that fall into place that decides that this will happen to you and this will not happen to you. As in many ways our stars are aligned with you and I today, isn't it?
Definitely, definitely. So maybe if I can move on from it, based on your experience, you're a master communicator. We're speaking to a lot of young professionals in the corporate world, and let's be honest, we don't get taught how to communicate. We don't get taught how to use communication to stand out or get ahead in our careers. And you might have dealt with some of us in the past. So, what advice do you have for that young professional who says, "I've never been taught how to communicate. What tips can I use to improve my communication?"
Well, I mean, there's two parts to it. One is communication in general, and the other is communicating on radio and television, which is something I do training for. So if anybody wants to do media training, there's a course, 30 steps and more you need to know before you get on air. I mean, and face the media, right? So there's two parts of it. In general communication, I think you need to accept that you need to pass a message on to another person, and if they don't get your message first time round, then you fail to communicate. So if you can do that, and I'm also guilty of it when we sort of relaxing, but in a more formal environment, understand you have to deliver your message to that person in as quick a time as possible, and in as clear a way in words and in diction as possible. If you don't do that, it doesn't matter how profound the message is, they won't get the message. So that's the first part. When it comes to being on air, right? I think there's no question, no matter what you do in the world these days, your ability, your inability to communicate is a major determiner in you taking up a leadership position. Is it right? Probably not right. Is it unfair? It probably is unfair. But is it the reality? It is the reality, right? That your ability to communicate and to front up a cause is bound to put you in a leadership position versus someone else who's brilliant at strategy, but who cannot articulate it as well as yourself. So there's an interest, therefore, that of all the things you invest in, if you're a CA, goodness, go and invest in that work. And if you're doing an MBA, do that. And if you're doing entrepreneurship, learn all the skills necessary from the experts. But in the same token, learn to communicate well publicly. And that's being on air as well as being a public speaker. Now, just perhaps the one advice I can give people for now, right, is what has given me the edge is, even as a lighty, the desire to read, the desire to read a lot, and the desire to read a lot aloud. And the key word there is aloud, because when I was a lighty, when I was a kid, and I read a lot aloud, what I didn't realize, but clearly what it was, I was practicing to do exactly what I'm doing right now. You effectively in some form of public speaking. So I would suggest that. And maybe the last thing that I would say for now is, often when people face the media, they're like as bung as anything. Like, oh, I'm going to face the media. What are they going to do? Now, unless you've done something seriously wrong, that's a different discussion about reputation management. But here's the thing to you. Far more people, their engagements in the media offers themselves and the companies they represent an opportunity to brand build. Just for example, the fact that you and I are talking now, you've posted on your LinkedIn post, and therefore you're branding me, right? And I post on my LinkedIn post and my Twitter post, and I brand you. So in a strange way, what are we and of course we're talking to each other, but by just creating this platform, we've created opportunities for both of us to pass on our message to a broader audience. And I think people need to take that responsibility really, really seriously. So what I'm saying is, get yourself media trained to ensure that when you do get the chance to go on air, that you are prepared for it. You can't swim for the first time, the time they throw you into the pool. Go for training. You can't learn to drive a car the first crack. There's a series of mistakes you're going to make. So especially if you're in a position of leadership, learn to get media trained and comfortable as quickly as possible, well before you get the chance to face the media, so that when you do face the media, you can deliver, you can be the best brand ambassador for your company. Maybe here's the last thing. Often people talk about, getting brand ambassadors to represent them and getting celebrities. But the best brand ambassador for a company is the company owners, is the company leadership. So if you are part of the company leadership, right, invest in the way you are going to face the media. That's my pitch to you.
That's great advice. So, reading aloud and learning is most important. My main takeaways. If you've got any questions for Ashraf, please include it in the comments so we don't miss it. We're going to be taking questions towards the end. The thing that you mentioned earlier, I just want to touch back on it as well, because myself, I'm a natural introvert, and people are still surprised because I host this weekly show. But I've just gotten better by practice and repetition and not being afraid to fail. That opens your world. And coming from a professional environment, also people are afraid to fail or afraid to make mistakes. And once you switch that, like willing to try, willing to make mistakes, you can build your career and you can improve your communication.
Well, I'm an introvert too, by the way. I'm the quietest guy in our house. The key is you talk when you need to talk, and that's when you can deliver. That's when it matters.
Maybe tell us a little bit about founder or the Champion South Africa. Give us a little bit of an idea of what Champion South Africa is about.
Okay, Champion South Africa exists primarily to shift South Africa from where we are to another place. And where we are is we're a mid-table nation. And we want to shift South Africa to a champion nation. Okay? So think about the United Nations Secretary General one day holding a trophy aloft and saying, well, here you are, I have this trophy here, and this trophy goes to the winning nation in the world for this year. And he says this year, or she says this year, I'd like to award it to South Africa. That's why we exist. That's our vision, to build us into a champion nation. How we get there is a lot more complicated. I understand that. We can't do a thing without government. We can't do a thing without business. We can't do a thing without social or civic activism, a whole combination of people. But the key factor in all of that is people, right? So the phrase we use, and it's an important one, is champion people build champion nations. So to become the champion nation, our role as Champion South Africa is to start sparking of an interest in people like you, Tooways, to become one of the champion people. We need you to lift your game, to up your game, to raise the bar, and everybody else watching us to say, can I become far better and outstanding at what I do? And if 1 million people think the same way today and say tomorrow we're going to make a far bigger impact than we've made already, and if you all do it together, suddenly we're a lot better. I mean, I talk to you right now in the midst of the Olympic Games, okay? So people may watch it much later on, but it's like July, August 2021, right? And you've seen the examples in sport, how people lift their game, and we all are in awe and say, oh, this is remarkable. So here's the bottom line. Why can't you do the same thing in government? Why can't you do the same thing in leadership? Why can't you do it in business? Why can't you do it as an educator? So that's why Champion South Africa exists. We're a loose body of people that wants to inspire champion thinking, that amplifies champions in their field, and then promotes, once we understand that they are champions, promote what they do in the hope that it'll inspire other people to become champions. Because I used the words earlier when I said champion people build champion nations, but let me take it a step back. The primary role, if you're a leader in your field, the primary role of a leader must be to grow other leaders. So the same way applies. If you're a champion, can you grow other champions? If you're unable to replicate yourself with another champion, you failed in your primary role. So with that in mind, I'll rephrase. I'll say champion people build champion people. And I'll move on to say champion people build champion organizations, champion people build champion communities, champion people build champion businesses, and then finally, champion people build champion nations. So hopefully that's the broad speak of why Champion South Africa exists.
That's true. I mean, I've seen so many leaders or poor leaders who don't build other leaders, and it's always about not wanting them to take over their jobs or something very short-sighted. So I fully agree with you. Are there any champions that we should be looking out for that you want us to be aware of in the short term in terms of people?
Well, I mean, there's different levels. So maybe I must also just say this much. The word champion is an important word because it's one of the few words that's a noun and a verb. Okay, so as a noun, it defines somebody who's excellent and outstanding at what they do, right? The traditional way of a champion, the one who has a gold medal, that's the one champion, right? But in another way, right, a champion is when you pick up a cause, when you pursue a cause, you champion a cause. So when you, in this case, therefore, when we say champion South Africa, we're talking about the country becoming a champion nation that we call champion South Africa, not junk state to South Africa, for example. But we're also saying we champion South Africa. We push that cause, right? So there's a dual purpose around that. The reality is, I mean, you ask me, there's so many champions I can think about. I mean, I'm going to be very current now because it's in my mind, okay? But people that are part of, WhatsApp groups that I'm involved in that inspire me all the time. And there's no order here, but like Buyani Zwane, Tunzi Mdwaba, Professor Mamokgethi Pakeng, Pali Lechotla, Rihanna Musaji. And of course, I can say a whole lot more, right? Andile Kumalo. I mean, these are people I interact with, and they're all champions in their field. And as I mentioned, 5, there's probably another 50 that I should mention just now, that they all are really impressive at what they do, and very importantly, they're not just good, they're good in and they're committed to developing the country. Because here's the key part: it's one thing being a champion for yourself, right? It's another making the link between what you do and your country does. Now, if you look today on LinkedIn, and I tweeted about it as well, I made the point that we must understand that when South Africa succeeds, we are the beneficiaries. So when South Africa wins, we win. When we win, South Africa wins. So you can't just be a champion on your own, in your own little Orania, for want of a better word. You have to impact society and lift society.
Definitely. I'm going to ask my favorite question that I like asking guests. So, what is one piece of advice you would give your younger self?
That I would give my younger self?
Yes. That would maybe, I don't know, push the envelope a little bit more, anything that if you think back to you 20, 30 years ago, what advice would you give yourself?
I think to take my academic studies a lot more seriously, and to probably develop a business, a greater business acumen, because I think if I did that, then besides Champion South Africa, I think I probably would have had ambitions to manage a big national-based company, which I think the fact that I'm no MBA person, I'm not the CA, that clearly would be the restriction. So my advice to people is learn, and this is an important, learn as many different skills as you can when you're growing up. Don't just say, well, I want to become a doctor, so nothing else matters. I don't have to learn to speak. I don't have to learn to play football. Rugby doesn't matter to me. No, learn as many skills as possible, right? Learn languages. I think the other important advice, learn to speak in South Africa an indigenous language. I think isiZulu, isiXhosa is critical, right? In terms of reaching the communities, the broader community. But by learning all those multiple skills, at some stage, they all come together. You don't know when, you don't know how, but they all come together. I mean, let's take an example of you and I talking now. So at our core, we're having a conversation. But somehow a year ago, we knew how to switch on a computer. But someone told us, I'm going to teach you how to actually present via a laptop on a platform called Zoom and meetings and a whole lot of other things, right? It was unheard of before. So there you are. We've learned something. So be open to learning all of the time.
That's a good way to summarize and to come close to the end. But let's move over to some questions from the audience. I've got most of them are just they're enjoying the content. But I've got a question, and you might have answered it a little bit before. But Dumisani wants to know what motivated you to start Champion South Africa campaign. You are a speaker. Do you think a speaking ability for any professional is important, or is the skill only the preserve of media personalities?
Let's start with the second one, Dumisani, because I think we've touched on it earlier on, and hopefully, even if you tune in late, you can rewind and watch this whole thing. No, I think a communication skill, no matter who you are, is critical. the ability to communicate to an audience. I'm a big fan of two people, both religious people. One is Archbishop Tutu. His ability to communicate is legendary. The other is Mufti Ismail Menk. Both of them religious figures, one Christian, one Muslim. The ability to communicate means they speak to a broad audience. So you can apply the same thing in your businesses. If you feel you can just be the guy behind be the bean counter, you will limit your ability to influence other people. The second part is what motivated me. In fact, it got motivated by a conversation I had with my own son, Zaid Garda, right? We chatted and we looked at ideas about other people and other organizations around the world. And we then jointly agreed that why don't we start this thing? What I must tell you, however, in its initial iteration, it was simply honoring people. But as the country changes and as things develop, it's now part honoring people, but a whole lot more about creating the type of champion connections that will turn somebody and something into a champion. What do I mean by creating champion connections? We often talk about networking, okay? So I'm saying, Dumisani, if I met you, and I'm meeting you now because we're meeting on an online forum, okay? If I meet you and you meet me, and if the conversation that we're having right now will shift one of us, in this case yourself or me, to do one act that will move us one step closer to becoming a champion nation, whatever it is, right? Then that's the type of champion connection I'm talking about, okay? So now it's a lot more about building champion connections besides simply awarding and acknowledging people. But I think the awarding and acknowledging is really, really important because it inspires. I think we all are inspired by people who've done it in whatever they feel. So when people have done it and we showcase them and we talk about them, you just take a whole generation of people with you along that journey and say, wow.
You've got a question from Fairuz Mohammed. What motivates Ashraf Garda?
I think two motivations, Fairuz. The one is the deep desire to go to heaven. Okay, that is sufficient motivation, I would think, right? The other in the South African space is the sheer motivation to build my country into a champion nation, and that is my driving force. So maybe I'll answer it slightly differently. In the past, it was like, so what would be your purpose? And it would be Champion South Africa. No, but Champion South Africa is the vehicle. My purpose now, and I sort of redefined it, my purpose now is champion people. Because if I can champion people, I will champion South Africa, which means I'll champion my own project. So therefore, what motivates me is the ability or the desire to deliver on the purpose that I've spoken about. But I can also tell you, Fairuz, I managed to watch your own interview with Tooways as well. And you made the point the other day, which I think is so important, right? Besides being motivated, have discipline. Because if you have discipline, as you did, you can still do hard work even the days you are demotivated. And that is the separation between people who are champions at their space and people who fall away. Clearly, you've shown evidence of that.
And you mentioned that doing one thing, even if it's doing one small thing consistently every day, that will also move. Those small things, every consistent, make a big difference in the long run. Ashraf, any last words from you or anything we didn't discuss that you want the audience to know?
Well, let me just give you this. I meant to post this thing on LinkedIn as well, but I'll share it with you. It's a longer last word, if you don't mind. It's like maybe 2 minutes of last word.
Go for it.
When I went for the Hajj pilgrimage a couple of years ago, on the last day of the Hajj, the Imam asked all of us in this tent in Mina in Saudi Arabia, like, I'm sure you want to stay here forever. And most of the people said, yes, we all want to stay here forever. And then he came to me, it's like, what about you? And I said, I'm in a hurry to go home. And he said, well, why are you in a hurry to go home? Did you not enjoy yourself? And I said, no, on the contrary, I have had a great 6 weeks, but I have been so inspired by the social justice model of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that I want to try and implement some aspects of that social justice model in my own country. So I'm in a hurry to go home because I have a country to build. Now, that was 4 years ago. There's a greater need now to build our country. Now, here's the final example, right, coming out of that social justice model. South Africa, whatever happened in KZN in particular, we know there's this massive discrepancy between rich and poor in this country that cannot be left alone. Goodness, something has to be happening. As I talk to you, the vast majority of people can't even switch on. They don't have electricity. How are we going to change that? So here's the point of the Medina example for me. The Medina example, the people of Mecca migrated as refugees. That's an important word. From Mecca to Medina. That's like Durban to Joburg. That's the distance. When they got there, because they were being persecuted, the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, advised the people of Medina who had helped these Meccans arrive to say, can you take these Meccans in and can you share in your wealth? And on the basis of that, the majority did that, and we honor them as this amazing group of people. What emerged from that was the Medina city-state that became the fountain of enlightenment for generations to come. Now, if we are so impressed by that act, and how then do we apply it in the South African scenario? I'm not saying give half your wealth, and I'm not saying give off your homes. I'm saying to you, can we do a strong world age is health? So can we undertake a mass campaign where each one of us can literally transfer our skills to one other person? Or can one family of haves transfer their skills to another family from a township of have-nots? Because that's the closest. It's not the Medina example. It's an adaptation of the Medina example of taking people in, one having one person, and you helping the other to set up. Once again, that's what South Africa needs.
Definitely inspiring. Thanks so much for that, Ashraf. Just a reminder to everyone that if you're watching on YouTube or the podcast and you feel that it's added value to you, don't forget to like and subscribe so that you get automatically notified the next time the episode comes out. We're still having our weekly discussion on Clubhouse about business and investing. That's every Monday at 5. Ashraf, thank you so much for your time. I sincerely appreciate it.
It's a pleasure, and I'd love to engage with people. So, I'm on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever it is. You can drop me an email as well, ashraf@championsouthafrica.co.za, all one word. Would love to engage you further. In fact, would love your ideas as how we can truly build South Africa into a champion nation. Hopefully you'll give it to me.
Thanks everyone for joining us for another episode of Tooways to Skin a Cat, powered by Bulldozer. Goodbye.